Sophie Reynolds collapsed into the plush restaurant chair, her worn sneakers hidden beneath the tablecloth as she caught her breath after running 6 blocks through downtown. The elegant steakhouse was beyond her budget, but Rachel insisted this networking dinner could change everything, and Sophie desperately needed change because her 3rd job interview rejection that week left her with $47 and a maxed credit card. Tell us which country you're watching from in the comments below. She pulled out her phone, not noticing the reserved sign beneath the table. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations of people who never worried about rent, their designer clothes contrasting with Sophie's thrift store blazer. She had spent 3 years working retail, waitressing, and freelancing to survive. She watched classmates post about promotions while she celebrated paying bills. Her mother kept asking when she would give up and come home, but Sophie had promised herself she would make it here. A waiter appeared with fresh bread, and she nearly cried because she had skipped lunch. The chair across from her scraped, and Sophie looked up to see a man in an impeccably tailored suit settling in with natural authority. He was devastatingly handsome, with dark hair and intensely blue eyes. Sophie opened her mouth to explain he had the wrong table, but he spoke first, asking if she had reviewed the portfolio materials his assistant sent. Her confusion showed, and his eyebrow raised as he leaned back with casual confidence. Before Sophie could correct the mistake, Rachel burst through the entrance but stopped dead seeing the man at Sophie's table. The color drained from Rachel's face, and she fled back out. Sophie stared bewildered as her phone buzzed. The text made her stomach drop. That is Harrison. Sophie looked back and felt reality tilt as she recognized Cole Harrison from business magazines, the 32-year-old CEO who had built a software empire. The breadbasket suddenly felt like lead in Sophie's stomach as she realized she was sitting at Cole Harrison's reserved table and had just let him think she was whoever he was supposed to be meeting. Her face must have betrayed her panic, because his expression shifted to something almost curious, his head tilting slightly as he studied her with intensity that made her skin feel too tight. She should apologize, should explain, should get up and leave, but her mouth refused to cooperate, and instead she heard herself saying the worst possible thing. So, about that portfolio. Cole's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, more like a predator recognizing interesting prey, and he signaled the waiter for wine as if her nervous rambling was exactly what he had expected. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a fever dream where Sophie found herself discussing business strategies she barely understood, nodding intelligently while internally screaming at her own stupidity. Cole spoke about market disruption and vertical integration with the casual fluency of someone discussing the weather, occasionally pausing to ask her opinion in a way that felt like a test she was definitely failing. She tried to contribute something intelligent about user interface design from her freelance experience, and for just a moment, his attention sharpened in a way that felt dangerous and thrilling. A phone buzzed insistently from his pocket, and his jaw tightened with visible irritation, but he ignored it completely, his focus remaining locked on her face. Sophie's phone vibrated continuously in her lap, with what she assumed were increasingly panicked messages from Rachel. But she could not look away from Cole's eyes, or stop the conversation that had somehow shifted from business to something more personal. He asked how she had gotten into design work, and she found herself telling the truth, about her small-town origins and her struggle to survive in the city, about her belief that good design could change how people experience the world. Something flickered across his face that looked almost like recognition, a crack in the polished armor, and he leaned forward slightly as if she had said something unexpectedly interesting. The waiter appeared with menus, and Sophie's stomach clenched at the prices, knowing she could not afford even the cheapest appetizer, but Cole ordered for both of them without asking. Let's play a game with those who only watch the comments. Type Destiny in the comments if you've made it this far. Now let's continue. The food arrived in courses that Sophie barely tasted, too caught up in the surreal experience of sitting across from a billionaire who seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. Cole asked about her design philosophy with real curiosity rather than polite interest, challenging her opinions in ways that made her defend and refine her thinking. She forgot to be intimidated somewhere between the salad and the main course, forgot that she was supposed to be terrified, and found herself actually enjoying the verbal sparring with someone who treated her ideas as worthy of serious consideration. His phone buzzed again, and this time he pulled it out with visible frustration, his expression darkening as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen. A woman's voice cut through the restaurant ambiance like a knife through silk, sharp and cold and absolutely furious. Isabel Hart materialized at their table in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained rage, her designer dress and perfect hair, a stark reminder of the world Sophie did not belong to. She looked at Sophie with dismissive contempt usually reserved for insects, then turned to Cole with eyes that burned with betrayal. "So this is why you canceled our meeting. You are interviewing candidates at our restaurant on the night of my gallery opening that you promised to attend." Cole's voice when he spoke was dangerously quiet, the kind of controlled calm that preceded explosions, and he told Isabel she was making a scene. Isabel laughed without any trace of humor, a sound like breaking glass, and informed him that she had earned the right to make a scene after 2 years of his divided attention and broken promises. Sophie tried to excuse herself, to escape this nightmare, but Cole's hand shot out and caught her wrist with gentle firmness. "Stay," he said simply, and something in his tone made it not quite a request, but not quite a command. Isabel's eyes widened with genuine shock that transformed rapidly into cold calculation, her gaze moving between Cole's face and his hand on Sophie's wrist. The confrontation that followed would have been entertaining if Sophie was not trapped in the middle of it, watching two people with obvious history tear strips off each other with surgical precision. Isabel accused Cole of using work as an excuse to avoid commitment, of hiding behind his company to escape anything real or vulnerable. Cole responded that she had never wanted him, just the trophy of dating a CEO and the social capital it provided. The words got sharper and more personal, until Sophie genuinely could not tell if they were going to start kissing or killing each other. A glass of water tipped over, spreading across the white tablecloth, and the spell broke. Isabel looked at Sophie one more time with an expression that promised future consequences, then turned and walked out with her head high and her heels clicking like gunshots. The silence after Isabel's departure felt thick enough to choke on, and Sophie finally found her voice to apologize for being at the wrong table, for the misunderstanding, for existing where she did not belong. Cole looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between amusement and exhaustion and strange vulnerability. "You are not who I was supposed to meet tonight," he said, and it was not quite a question. Sophie shook her head, explained about Rachel and the networking dinner and sitting down at what she thought was an empty table. His laugh when it came was genuine and surprised. "So you just accidentally crashed my business dinner and somehow made it the most interesting evening I have had in months." The admission hung between them like a confession, and Sophie felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. Cole signaled for the check with a gesture that suggested he did this every night, but his eyes never left her face. He asked if she was looking for work, and Sophie nodded, trying not to hope too hard. His next words made her brain short-circuit completely. "I am opening a new design division, and I need someone who actually cares about the work, rather than just the paycheck. Monday morning, 9 a.m., Harrison Tech headquarters. Ask for me specifically," Cole said, as he stood and offered his hand to help her up. His grip was warm and firm and sent electricity up her arm. Sophie opened her mouth to thank him, but no sound came out, her brain still trying to process that she had just accidentally interviewed for a job and somehow succeeded. Cole's smile turned slightly wicked. "Don't be late, Sophie Reynolds," he said, and she realized with a start that she had never actually told him her name. The weekend that followed existed in a state of suspended unreality, where Sophie alternated between excitement and absolute terror. Rachel appeared at her tiny apartment within an hour of the disastrous dinner, demanding every detail and switching between horror at Sophie's accidental deception and delight at the outcome. They researched Harrison Tech obsessively, reading every article about Cole's brilliant business strategies and notoriously high standards. The internet had plenty to say about Isabel Hart, too, a prominent art gallery owner from old money who had been photographed with Cole at various charity events. Monday morning arrived with cruel punctuality, and Sophie stood outside the gleaming Harrison Tech Tower, feeling like an imposter in her best interview outfit. The building was all glass and steel ambition, reaching toward the sky with the confidence of people who never doubted their place. The executive suite was intimidatingly beautiful, all modern design and expensive art. Sophie gave her name to the receptionist and tried not to pass out, watching the woman's eyebrows rise slightly before she made a quiet phone call. Within seconds, Cole appeared, looking even more devastating in a navy suit. Sophie followed Cole through corridors of glass-walled offices where employees looked up from their work with barely concealed curiosity. His assistant fell into step beside them, rattling off his schedule with military precision, including that Isabel had called 4 times demanding to speak with him. Cole's jaw tightened at Isabel's name, but his pace never faltered, leading Sophie to a conference room with city views. The design portfolio spread across the conference table was actually hers, samples of her work that Cole must have found online. They spent the next hour discussing the role Cole envisioned, a senior design position that would give Sophie creative control and a salary that made her want to cry with relief. The contract was straightforward but generous, including benefits she had only dreamed about, and a signing bonus that would solve her immediate financial crisis. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name, making the deception official and irrevocable. The first week at Harrison Tech passed in a blur of orientation and overwhelming information. Sophie worked harder than she had ever worked in her life, staying late and arriving early, determined to prove she deserved this opportunity. The confrontation with Isabel happened in the executive elevator on a Thursday afternoon, a chance encounter that felt more like a calculated ambush. Isabel stepped in just as the doors were closing, her eyes narrowing with recognition when she saw Sophie alone. "So you are the little charity case Cole picked up at the restaurant," Isabel said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Sophie kept her expression neutral, but her heart hammered against her ribs, trapped in the small space. Isabel moved closer, her perfume overwhelming. "He does this sometimes, finds broken things and tries to fix them, but he always gets bored and moves on." The doubt Isabel had planted grew like poison over the next few days, making Sophie question every interaction with Cole. Her first major project presentation approached with terrifying speed, a complete redesign of Harrison Tech's user interface. Sophie worked until her eyes burned, refining every pixel, knowing this was her chance to prove she belonged, or confirm she was just a fraud. The night before the presentation, Sophie was still in the office at midnight when Cole found her surrounded by coffee cups. "You are trying too hard," he said. "Your first instincts are always better than your overthinking." Cole sat down at her workspace without invitation, asking to see her rejected concepts. They spent the next 2 hours going through her designs together, his feedback sharp, but never cruel. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the conversation shifted from professional to personal, Cole asking about her background with genuine curiosity. She told him about her small-town childhood and her determination to prove she could make it, about her mother's disappointment and her own fear of failure. His expression when she finished was complicated. "I grew up with everything," Cole said quietly, "and it made me absolutely miserable." He talked about the pressure of family expectations and the isolation of wealth. The moment stretched and shifted, professional boundaries blurring into something more complicated, and Sophie felt the air change with possibility. Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with gentleness that made her breath catch. "This is a terrible idea," he said, but there was a question in his voice. Sophie knew he was right, knew that getting involved with her boss who had hired her under false pretenses was a disaster waiting to happen, but she leaned into his touch anyway. Their first kiss was soft and questioning, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something hungry and desperate. The presentation the next morning was a triumph that Sophie barely remembered, too exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. Cole watched from the back with professional pride, and Isabel was there too, sitting beside Cole with possessive body language. Sophie presented her designs with confidence, answered questions competently, and tried not to think about how everything was about to explode. The explosion came from Sophie's own guilt, finally reaching critical mass. She found Cole in his office after the presentation and confessed everything about the wrong table and the misunderstanding and accepting the job under false pretenses. Cole's laugh when it finally came was bitter and sad, nothing like his genuine amusement from before. "So you lied to me from the beginning," he said flatly, and Sophie wanted to argue but knew better. His next words cut deeper. "Isabel was right about you. You saw an opportunity and took it." The unfairness of the accusation made Sophie's own anger finally rise, hot and defensive. The argument that followed was brutal, Sophie defending her desperate choices while Cole accused her of using him. She threw his privilege back in his face, asked him if he had ever been so desperate that the wrong choice felt like the only choice. He countered that poverty did not excuse deception. Sophie turned to leave, accepting that this was the end of everything. But Cole's voice stopped her at the door. "The job was never about the restaurant," he said quietly. "I looked at your work after that night and hired you because you are genuinely talented, not because I felt sorry for you." The admission made everything more complicated rather than simpler. The resolution came gradually over days and weeks of painful honesty, Cole and Sophie learning to rebuild trust from shattered pieces. He kept her employed but maintained professional distance that hurt worse than anger. Sophie proved herself through work, letting her designs speak when words failed. Isabel made one final play for Cole's attention, appearing at a company gala with photographers in tow and a ring on her finger from another man's proposal. She thanked Cole publicly for teaching her what she really wanted. Backhanded gratitude meant to wound, but his expression showed only relief. Sophie watched from across the ballroom and felt the last obstacle between her and Cole dissolve. Their second first kiss happened in the empty office after everyone had left, Cole finding Sophie at her desk and simply pulling her into his arms without preamble. The wrong table had led to the right person, accidental dishonesty creating space for eventual truth, and Sophie learned that sometimes the messiest beginnings led to the strongest foundations. Their love story became office legend, and every time Sophie passed that conference room, she sent thanks to the universe for making her sit in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time. True love teaches us that perfection is less important than authenticity, that sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest blessings, and that choosing someone means choosing them again every day even when it is hard. The courage to be honest when dishonesty would be easier, to stay when leaving would be simpler, to trust after betrayal, that is where real love lives. What did you think of Sophie's choice to confess her deception, even knowing it might cost her everything she had gained? Do you believe Cole was right to keep her employed after discovering the truth, or should he have fired her on principle? How would you have handled being in Sophie's position when she realized she had accidentally deceived someone? Which moment in their journey from deception to trust touched your heart most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments, tap like if this story moved you, and don't forget to subscribe to Veil Drama for more unforgettable love stories.